Hey, quick favor, we need your input. For a few weeks this August, we are going to be giving ourselves our usual late summer break, and as usual, we'll be running some favorites from the archives. But this year, we are asking for your help in deciding what to run. In our newsletter, we're going to be doing a series of votes on what episode we should feature each day. So it's up to you to chime in, and that will help us decide. All you have to do is subscribe to the This Day newsletter at thisdaypod.com. We'll be sending out our first poll soon, so jump on it. This episode is brought to you by NPR's Life Kit podcast. Let me tell you a true story. I was just outside in my backyard doing a little gardening and, as always, absolutely getting demolished by mosquitoes. Then I came in to record this very message right here about NPR's Life Kit, a show that gives you useful guidance to live your life a little better. And guess what their most recent episode is about? How to actually make yourself less attractive to mosquitoes. See, that is exactly the kind of advice you get from Life Kit, from fitness routines to mental resilience to navigating personal goals. Life Kit offers real stories, relevant insights, and clear takeaways. Finances, parenting, household chores. It's not just self-improvement, it is about living a better life, starting right now. And yes, there's advice about mosquitoes. Look, I'm not going to spoil that episode for you. You should go listen to it. But that citronella candle, it's probably not doing anything. Anyway, go check out their list of episodes. I'm sure you will find something with some advice that you are looking for. Listen now to the Life Kit podcast from NPR. I want to take a moment to tell you about the Electronic Frontier Foundation and their podcast, How to Fix the Internet. For 35 years, the Electronic Frontier Foundation has been fighting to make sure that when you go online, your rights go with you. EFF has rescued podcasts from patent trolls, helped encrypt the web to protect your privacy, and prevailed in lawsuits against government secrecy and surveillance. I am a huge fan of their work, and can I let you in on a little something? The laptop that I'm recording this promo on right now has an EFF sticker on it covering the camera. I'm looking at it right now, and I would say at least once a week when I'm working at a coffee shop or something, someone will notice it and say, "Oh, wow, I really love EFF." I have long admired and supported their work to protect our rights online, and I am really excited to tell you about how to fix the internet. If you care about digital rights, privacy, or even just have questions and concerns about how to make technology work for us rather than the other way around, How to Fix the Internet and EFF are here to help. Season 6 is out right now. You can visit EFF.org/podcast to listen. That's EFF.org/podcast for How to Fix the Internet and to join EFF. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, July 25th, 1913, the state of Pennsylvania creates the Pennsylvania Historical Commission, which, among other things, is tasked with creating and maintaining, quote, monuments, tablets, or other markers on places or buildings where historical events have transpired. And this moment, in many ways, is the birth of the modern historical marker industrial complex. Listeners, you know that we love a good plaque. On this show, we love a good historical marker. Shout out to all of you listeners who from time to time will send me an email with a interesting plaque that you've stumbled across. We also love stories about how the way in which we choose to tell history says a lot about the present. And the story of historical markers reflects a lot about the early part of the 20th century and the decades since. Plus, anyone who has taken a great American road trip can attest that there are a lot of weird historical markers out there. So we're going to dive into all of it here to discuss, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Both card-carrying members of the Always Read the Plaque Club, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Hey there.
Now, before we get going, I want to give a quick shout out to a listener, Bob Cook, who runs this newsletter and this really cool Blue Sky account called Historical Marker Ahead. And he chronicles a lot of his adventures in tracking down interesting historical markers. So we're going to link to that in our newsletter, which is a nice little hint for you to go subscribe to our newsletter, thisdaypod.com. I also want to do some crowdsourcing on interesting historical markers in the newsletter. So if you want to get in on that, I'll talk about that in a minute. Go to thisdaypod.com, sign up to our newsletter, subscribe. Shout out to everyone who's doing that. And this is such a fascinating topic, I'll say, with so many great examples that we're going to do it in two parts. So part one is going to be some history of the historical marker and kind of what it has reflected over the decades. And then in part two, we're just going to riff on some of our favorite examples, including, NIki, I know you're excited about all the historical markers about ghosts.
Yes, and vampires and witches and a wizard.
And a wizard, yeah.
Oh my God.
Spoiler alert.
Let's go to Pennsylvania, 1913. And, I'll kind of try and get a sense of why Pennsylvania takes the lead here. Markers in this era, in the early part of in the first decade or so of the 20th century, were usually plaques, often attached to rocks. And the first bronze plaque in Pennsylvania is at the site of Fort McCord in Franklin County. And it was jointly dedicated by the Enoch Brown Association and the Pennsylvania Historical Commission, which had just been enacted. This is in October of 1914. And very quickly, the Pennsylvania Commission starts to install markers statewide, mostly about, what you would expect, famous people, war, a lot of French and Indian War stuff, American Revolution stuff, a couple Native American locations. And then going into the 20s, Virginia really kind of steps into the fray here too. And I would say probably enacts what I would say is the kind of first modern attempt at these kinds of markers. And the markers that Virginia starts to put up look a lot like the signs we see today, which are these large double-faced cast metal signs affixed to posts along major highways. So it's not a plaque sort of lashed to a rock anymore. It's these actual sort of historical markers. North Carolina, West Virginia sort of follow suit in the 30s. And then, as we'll talk about, it kind of spreads and spreads and spreads for a bunch of reasons. One of which, Kellie, and this is where I kind of think this story is a really interesting reflection of the time in which it's taking place. But there's, in the 30s, a real kind of interest in colonial history, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a whole colonial revival movement. But it totally makes sense. When you think about the times, it's the 1930s, but people are thinking about the 1830s, the 1730s. They're thinking about this bygone era in which they want to try to preserve, restore, magnify. And so some of it actually has a huge impact on architecture. Like people across the country are trying to model their homes off of this sort of colonial style and windows and doors and things of that nature. But also it's a way to sort of like think of revolutionary heroes and patriots and founding fathers and certain places that they either lived or certain battles that took place to be able to mark that moment and really create a narrative that gives America a sense of itself and tells a story about what America was, or at least wants to be, remembered for in these historical markers.
Yeah, it's both a sense of what America could be, what it stands for, and also a kind of sense of loss, right? Yeah. The early 20th century, you have rapid industrialization, urbanization. In places like Pennsylvania, there just aren't sizable indigenous populations anymore. And so it's like there was this place called America that looked a particular way, and that is disappearing. And these markers are a way of sort of capturing what once was.
Yeah.
And, or at least an idealized version of what once was.
Yeah, romanticized.
For sure. And, this between the wars era is really fascinating in that, there's the industrialization. I think there's just a kind of reckoning about what is this American project up to coming out of World War I. There's a ton of immigration in that era. And so I think there's this idea of like we need to start telling a story about ourselves and Americanizing a lot of new immigrants. I also can't help but think about, there's those videos. Actually, is the very first thing you see in Ken Burns' Civil War documentary are those videos of the last Civil War veterans marching in a parade in like 1928 or something like that. And so I can't help but think that like in this era, there's also just like a generational, like, the biggest trauma and the biggest story in the American experiment, those generations are disappearing. And I think there's a look back, that's just naturally comes from that. I think we're going to start to really feel that now as the last World War II veterans start to die, and the last baby boomers. I just understand why there's this kind of colonial instinct that emerges in the 20s and 30s.
But we should also pull that thread of the 1920s being this particularly xenophobic and
Absolutely.
racist decade.
Yes.
It's the height of eugenics in the United States, and it's when the Confederate statues are starting to go up all across the United States. It's when you get those really strict, very racist quotas on immigration. There is this sense that white America has to be reasserted and naturalized, right? So like this was our natural history. And so tying a state like Virginia to both the lost cause and the revolution, like making sure there's a clear through line for people, I think is also a big motivator here.
Yeah.
But it's also not just about having a historical marker. It's also about having like a historical space. Like when you think about Colonial Williamsburg and you think about these destinations that people can go to, can travel to, almost as a tourist attraction, to be able to live in that nostalgia of what would it be like and what did they dress like and how did they speak, and that kind of fantasy, I think, is a big part of how people participate in history making.
Yeah. I don't want to get too big think here, but I think you're right, Kellie, that like sometimes I feel like you see these signs and you think, oh, this is just like a bunch of interesting fun facts. But I think to your point, like the project of grounding it in physical space and also, as we'll talk about, kind of standardizing the look, all of a sudden you just kind of, when you're driving around or you're walking around, you kind of feel like steeped in history and you feel like you're part of a bigger project, which I think is great and important, but also can be kind of manipulated and pushed in a certain direction. But it's not just about like trivia of like these things happened here. It's like, no. You are walking on a certain kind of hallowed ground that is connected in these kinds of ways.
And there's something so official about the style, like that pressed brass style of it. In Pennsylvania, in 1945, they start a kind of this new era of historical markers. They redesign the signs. Now it's a blue background with gold letters, so very distinctive. It has the coat of arms of the Commonwealth on it, big metal poles. And so as you're going along, they're very easy to spot. And so people who are like driving along in their cars in Pennsylvania can pull over, stop, read the sign. And in fact, being in your car looking at these signs is a big part of the reason that you see an explosion of these historical markers in the 1950s and in the 1960s. As you have a more prosperous car-based culture, the Highways Project comes in the 1950s. You start to see more of these signs, but also with suburbanization. I mean, one of the big things about suburbanization is it functionally emerges by erasing the landscape and then building all of these houses on top of it. And when you've erased the landscape, you've kind of erased a bit of history. And these signs are being put up in order to sort of reassert that history and to map a particular version of that history on these new kind of blank, placeless landscapes.
Yeah.
And so I think that combination of car culture and suburbanization is a big part of this. It's also like when roadside attractions become big, like we have the biggest ball of twine. Look at our giant peach. Like it's part of that culture as well.
Yeah. Or the birthplace of Jimmy Carter or something like that. Or you see a lot of those signs where like, oh, this town seems like it's, nothing. And then you drive by and realize it's some celebrity was born there or whatever.
Yeah. And that hidden, erased history is such a huge part of this too, right? I mean, I took a trip to Scotland a number of years ago and went to a battlefield that was largely the terrain. It was largely untouched and the terrain was the same. And, I listened to an audio tour and I just stood there in the space and I understood the space and I could tell how the battle played out. And, okay, that marshy area over there was really, key to this battle and these troop movements. And you get the little of that at like some Civil War places. But as suburbs go up and new buildings go up and roads slash through the terrain, you need those reminders to point out like stuff happened in real space in real time here, not just so-and-so was born in this house or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, folks, time to tell you about a brilliant new show joining the Radiotopia family. It comes from Alex Sujan Laughlin, who you probably know as one of the co-creators of Normal Gossip and just an all-around brilliant producer. This show is called Try Hard. It is so hard to try something new. Maybe you dream of playing guitar or speaking fluent Spanish. Maybe you want to learn to tap dance or do magic tricks or yodel. I personally, in the last year, have started to take singing lessons. Really hard. But guess what? What if you had a little bit of help in the form of Alex Sujan Laughlin? Each episode, Alex helps one ordinary person do the thing that they never thought they could. The process is embarrassing and uncomfortable, but hopefully always worth it. So join in, be a tryhard, check it out. The new show from Defector Media and Radiotopia is out July 28th, wherever you get your podcasts. And congratulations to Alex and team. I want to take a moment to tell you about Quince, your solution to stylish summer clothes. Now, I am recording this very spot on what I would say is the first true summer day here where I live. It is hot. It is sunny. I'm not going to lie. It's a little sticky even down here in my office. It is all those things, but it can still also be stylish. To me, peak summer is the time to go back to those reliable, high-quality staples in your wardrobe. Obviously, there's linen. And lucky for you, Quince has a ton of great linen clothing, from button-downs to pants to shorts. I have fully flipped the switch to linen, sometimes all linen. I am wearing my 100% European linen drawstring beach pants right now. They go great with sandals, but I can also dress them up a little bit if I want to throw on a button-down or even a light jacket. By the way, those linen pants, they're under $50. How does Quince do this? Well, it's by working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman. Quince gives you luxury without the markup. Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. Stay cool out there, folks. So the car is a huge part of this. And then, we keep saying this over and over. We're going to keep saying this next year. The bicentennial in 76 was a huge part of this. People start getting that sort of fervor back in them. They start driving across the country. There's all sorts of sort of push to do these like patriotic American heritage road trips. And there's an interesting dynamic there, too. And I'm curious for the two of you, like, these road signs are and historical markers obviously are very local, and they kind of tell you exactly what happened on that site. But if you are on a road trip and you just keep seeing them over and over and over, it does kind of also create this larger story of like tying the country together, and making us realize that this history is all connected, even though you're maybe hundreds of miles away at this point from where you saw the last road sign.
I think that's really important because there is, even though like a lot of these signs aren't actually publicly created, like a lot of them are private, because they're all kind of the same style. And because there's kind of a set of expectations that you bring to the signs when you see them, there is a kind of officialness to them. So that when you see the signs, you're like, this is part of some larger entity telling the story. And it has like the stamp of officialdom to it that gives it a kind of power that I don't think it would have if they were just kind of like random, non-standardized kinds of signs and plaques.
Yeah, you know what to look for, and it always sort of catches your eye. I always stop when I see historical signs, even if I'm on the highway and if I can get a quick glimpse, and if I really want to like follow up, I will either Google it on the spot or even go back to try to see what the sign said, depending on like where it's positioned. But like sometimes they're great places to take selfies, depending on what the sign is and how much it matters to you. But I don't know. I've always found that like it's a way of connecting the dots and having a moment of like historical alibi. Like, wow, so-and-so was here when this happened.
That makes me think. And obviously, look, you live in Massachusetts. I spend a lot of time in New York. There's a lot, the sort of the over indexes for signs. But I will say when I go to like the Hudson Valley in particular, when I'm driving around, I mean, there's a sign like every mile. And I often will stop and look at it. And I'm like, oh, wow, cool sign. Like there must have been something real. And I will tell you, it is almost always, there was a mill here. It's like always a mill. Okay, fine. There was a mill here.
Great. Good information.
Or the other one is, how many places did George Washington sleep? Every single place George Washington slept has a sign. It's crazy. Yes. So it's either a mill
for a lot of years.
or George. And sometimes, George Washington slept at a mill, and then it's like
Did he though?
That's the double whammy right there. But it is
No,
kind of
the mill is everywhere.
Yeah. So some of them are a little underwhelming. Sometimes I'll stop and be like, oh yes, and then it's like another fucking mill. All right. But mills were very important back in the day.
That's right.
But I guess NIki, I mean,
like, how many mills do you need?
but like really, I think, listeners who aren't in the Northeast, I'd be curious to hear from you. But like, what is your sense? I mean, I've driven across the country a bunch, and so when you're driving through Nevada or Wyoming, there isn't a road sign every mile, but like, is it really a Northeast phenomenon?
It's not solely a Northeast phenomenon. I'm thinking about my home state of Indiana, and there are tons of historical markers at places like New Harmony, Benjamin Harrison Park. Like, the historic things happen in the Midwest too, Jody.
I know, but I think this instinct
they're spread further
to
apart,
just
right?
like litter every single and commemorate every single
and
moment.
George Washington didn't sleep that many places west
true.
of the Mississippi,
Yeah,
so
true.
that's a little more challenging.
But Abe Lincoln did a bunch of stuff.
But it also starts to get, like, actually there are tons of Abe Lincoln signs in Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. So I grew up around a lot of those. But they start to kind of get crowded out by the national park signs, right? Because so much of that land, once you get west of the Mississippi, is national park. Because I was thinking about like the kinds of things that I stop for, and I stop for like the vistas, and then there are always these signs that like tell you about the people who lived there, or about like the landscapes and forms, and they're kind of like plaques, but they're not. I mean, they're like ecological historical markers, but much less so the kinds of historical markers we're thinking of. So I think it looks different once you get away from like the sort of like solid and stolid history of the East Coast. But there's still like such a market in it, right? That it's important to these like small towns in the Midwest and other places to have these signs.
Yeah. I also think New England in particular, because there's so many, because New England is so old. Like, it's not just historical markers. Like, people take great pride in putting the year that their house was constructed outside their home. It's like, there's down the street from me, there was a house that was built in 1730. And I'm like, 1730? Gosh, that's like, the United States wasn't even the United States, but there's always this deep sort of pull to be able to say, like, when something was founded or started, be it a house or a school or, what have you. So I think there's something to be said about being in New England in particular, in which, like, being able to say how far something goes back is a point of deep pride.
Yeah. Okay, so as I said, we're going to wrap up this episode, and then next episode we're just going to talk about a bunch of really fascinating and interesting examples, including ghosts and others that have gotten historical markers. But I do want to circle back to something you said, NIki, about how when it is standardized, and when it is, I think people can picture it, right now, that like cast iron thing on a pole, both sides, the stamp, often a crest. I mean, this is often the work of history, but it's like as soon as you write it down in a certain way and present it in a certain way, it becomes capital H history, which has power in the way that we've been talking about, and it's also very problematic because it's like, who gets to decide that history? And so I'm curious, Kellie, I mean, you said you are a part of a commission that maybe has a hand in doing this.
Yeah, I'm on the Massachusetts Historical Commission.
Right, so what is the process by which you decide to get these signs? And then next episode, we'll also talk about how a lot of times people just like freelance with it too, or just make stuff up or whatever. But like,
it's a long process. It's not just, hey, I've got an idea, and then people vote, and yay, and then boom, you get your sign. Like, there's a lot that goes into it. And the Massachusetts Historical Commission is not just voting on who gets signs, but it's also who gets funding, because a lot of it is about restoration projects. Some of these, either if it's a house that someone famously lived in, or it's a construction project, like, they need a lot of funds to be able to restore that, to be able to make it a place in which people can go and visit to and tour. And so there is a lot that goes into it. And with each and every single item that's on the docket, like, there's a whole historical context of, this was this person, this was why they mattered, this is what they did, this is, they're waving their kids, their friends, whatever. Like, they give you a whole presentation, PowerPoint slides and all, of all of the history that happened, so that you're not just voting on, like, this is Bob, he lived, it's much more of a in-depth, research-oriented. There are researchers that go out, they do all the research, they find all of the things, they make sure that the placement is accurate, that no one's just saying like, oh yeah, Babe Ruth lived here. Like it has to be verified and all of that stuff. And then we open it up to the public, and the public can give comments and they can give feedback. And then commissioners can also ask questions and give feedback. And then there's a vote. Yeah. So it's a long sort of drawn out process, but it's really important one to be a part of.
And no surprise, in recent years, that process has also been revisited. I mean, for instance, we started with Pennsylvania being one of the first states in the teens and the 20s to do this. In 2017, in the wake of Charlottesville and the conversation about monuments and other markers, they undertook a sort of process to review the entire collection of 2,500 historical markers in Pennsylvania and try and diversify the offerings there. So, like all the work of history, it's a sort of ongoing, contested evolving space.
And a set of statements of values. And I think that's why it's so contested.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, the process you described, Kellie, reminds me a very similar thing. But, in New York, I think a lot of cities, but in New York especially, there's always efforts to rename streets and blocks after notable people. And I actually have a friend who works at the Department of Transportation. His job is to help kind of manufacture the signs that you then get put up when something gets named after someone. But I've been at a couple city council or community board meetings where people are proposing that, and it's the same sort of thing. You have to gather signatures, you have to tell a story, you have to justify it. Often there's like two notable
slides.
Yeah, get your slides together. Often there's like two notable people who lived on that block. It's like, who gets the sign? So it's the same sort of thing. One more thing before we go, because next episode I think we'll see a lot of the kind of cracks in this system and the way that certain signs slip through the cracks with bad information, or people go rogue and put up their own signs and so forth. And I think it further sort of shows the tension between the sort of capital H history and just the sort of like oral history and the folklore of a place. To that end, I do want to give a shout out to one of my favorite apps, which is the Atlas Obscura app. It's one of the few apps that's like on my homepage of my phone, actually. But
really?
I think people know Atlas Obscura is a kind of history project that tries to find smaller and weirder history in different places. And they have an app that collects all of these and also has a map feature. And so whenever I'm in a new place, I just pull that up and you can just see all these sort of crowdsourced, submitted stories of all weird stuff that happened. And sometimes it will point to kind of a weird historical marker sign, but more often than not, it's just like some research someone had done and so forth. So as I'm thinking about the tension between the sort of like capital H history of the official commission sign versus the kind of like crowdsourced history of something like the Atlas Obscura app, there's a lot of blurry lines there, but anyway, next episode, we will dive into a lot of this stuff: ghosts, weirdos, people going rogue, contested signs, people making stuff up at Trump's golf course, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we will be back for part 2. But for now, Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.